I think a lot of people who are healthy aren't just counting their macros. They find meaning in what they're eating, and not just identity based. I'm vegan, I'm paleo, whatever. It's more just like, this is right for my body. This is what my body wants. Health experts disagree about almost everything, except for the fact that we should all be eating more green and colorful, especially non-starchy vegetables. Having a green smoothie, having a big salad is something that we do almost every day. The coolest thing about eating a fair amount of veggies and fruits and like real foods every day is that it pushes out whatever else would be making you hungry. So like when I see Oreos, or maybe if I see a billboard of a hamburger, I want a hamburger, but not that one. Right? Like it pushes out the bad kind. It resets your palate, your senses, your sense of smell. When you stay away from the junk and you focus on eating real stuff, it just resets your whole body in a beautiful way.
Hey there, welcome back to High Intensity Health Radio. It's Mike Mutzel. Thanks so much for being here. Today we're live with Abel James. He's the author of this great book called The Paleo Diet, which my wife and I both read. I would highly encourage you do too. Today we're going to talk about his book and some lessons learned from his unique life experience and his weight loss journey. Abel is also a podcaster himself. He has a great podcast called The Fat Burning Man Show, which can be found at fatburningman.com. So Abel, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. So Abel, I think a great starting place would be kind of your backstory and how you took this information about nutrition and fitness, which by the way, there's no shortage of, and you really took action on that information and did something and caused your body to shift. And by the way, I just want to mention that you did the exact opposite of what people were saying at the time, and you actually exercised less and ate more, but lost weight. So share with us some mindset tips and strategies that can motivate other people to kind of do the same.
Yeah, I guess we can kind of work backwards because the reason that all of that happened and I was so vehement and still am against the way that most people eat and the way that a lot of us are told to eat is because I got fat and sick. So I got burned by doing exactly that, trying to be healthy. And so for me, I grew up in the middle of nowhere in New Hampshire, and my mom is an herbalist and a nurse practitioner, really into hippy dippy stuff, always has been. So it was natural for me to kind of rebel against that. And so doing so, and basically instead of eating food from our backyard, or our gardens, we would get, wild foods from the woods. Like I grew up on 60 acres, which is just so cool. Instead of that, when I was working in DC as a consultant, ironically enough, with, the food industry in some cases, I'd hop down to the Safeway and I'd get, things that are supposed to be healthy, fruit like bananas and apples and orange juice. And, when I went into the doctor after I started to gain a little bit of weight, he basically said, with your family history of high blood pressure, kind of suspect blood lipid numbers, high triglycerides, and just various things like that, you need to eat very low fat, and you need to exercise a lot. You need to go out jogging more. And at the time I was already running 20, 30 miles a week. And so after I continued to gain weight and kind of like lose vitality doing that, I just got to this breaking point where I looked at myself in the mirror and I'm like, this doesn't work anymore. Clearly I'm trying so hard eating food that tastes like cardboard, spending a lot of money on this diet. And I've never dieted in my life. This is stupid and it's not working. I'm not going to settle for this. And so then I kind of flipped that on its head and just started doing a high fat, lower carb, real food approach. And went back to being a young buck in my prime, which, the way that I feel is not that I'm awesome and have all these muscles or whatever, a six pack. It's like, I think that pretty much everyone should reset their idea of normal to that. When you look at, what happened 50 years ago, you look at wartime photos, like any dude with his shirt off was ripped and like had good muscle and was like built well and was not carrying extra fat. Not every person, but you know what I mean? Like most people. And same thing with women. They looked well. They had a trim figure for the most part. Now it doesn't look like that. So one of the things that I'm trying to do is just reset the idea of what's normal.
Yeah, you're doing a great job of it. You're getting a lot of downloads, a lot of traffic, a lot of credibility there. But what's unique about your approach is you're a self-proclaimed regular guy. You were working in a totally different industry, wanted to make a change in your own life, and took action and hit the books and started studying, reading, all the books, and got into the Paleo Diet and so forth. And I think that's inspiring for a lot of people who may feel like they need to go they don't know enough, or they don't have the background in health and nutrition. They don't have a degree in biology, but neither do you. So you want to talk about maybe what were the steps that got you into the Paleo Diet? Did you read the Paleo Diet by Lauren Cordain, or like take us down to the ground level when you said, all right, I'm done with this, excessive exercise and low fat diet?
You know what's funny is that I did read the original Paleo Diet book, and I didn't like it at all when I first read it. I thought it didn't make sense. The story was a little bit off. Like canola oil didn't make sense, in terms of a caveman diet, and whatever. So anyway, I kind of like disregarded that at first. But it was interesting when, I was very attracted to the work of Weston A. Price and Sally Fallon, Nourishing Traditions. And, some of that came from my mom, because she's had a long history of speaking about what's healthy and not necessarily a plant-based approach, but using plants and herbs to incorporate into clinical practice. That was the subject of her first book. And so it's, thinking about plants as something that can heal you, and eating food from a natural world is something that is inherently like spot on in terms of my psychology and what I think. So the first paleo book didn't really do that, but then I got looped into kind of the Weston A. Price. I don't know what to call it, but I guess it's a community, really. Sure. And then paleo kind of evolved, so to speak, into being more about like low carb, high fat in some cases. And, then it started being more, oh yeah, you can eat grains sometimes and legumes too. And like dairy is okay as long as it's high fat too. And so like it just, I found myself on a panel with Rob Wolf and Mark Sisson 3 or 4 years ago at the first Paleo FX conference. And I'm just like, this is interesting, because paleo in and of itself kind of subsumed the real food movement in a lot of ways. Now it's getting a little bit tricky because all the marketers are on board, seeing that paleo is this big thing and they're abusing it, and making all these paleo foods that are not paleo at all. So, or at least not the way that our ancestors would have eaten. So I think it's important that you just put your foot down and you say, this is not paleo every once in a while, right?
Right. I like that approach because, like you said, a lot of companies are seeing the market potential here, and there is a huge demand. I think with the infusion of CrossFit and functional exercises breeds that kind of grain-free, high-protein, high-fat diet. But in my opinion, what I see, and there's nothing wrong with that. I eat that way most of the time myself. But what I see, the paleo diet has kind of morphed into Atkins, and we see a lot of people doing just tons of fat, which is fine, but not enough vegetables, I think. And I think, like you mentioned, from the inspiration from your mother, I mean, that's where the power is. The phytochemicals, the plant-based nutrients, bacteria from the earth, I think is really powerful. So, and along those lines, you talk about in your book that, about 100 years ago, I think it was 1 in 10 individuals in the U.S. were farmers, and now it's 4 in 100. So maybe talk about that and the impact that has on our food, and then what we can do as citizens of our country to help reverse that trend.
Yeah, well, one thing I always say kind of tongue in cheek is that a lot of people kind of identify me as paleo, and I do sometimes as well, but I'm more like 70, 80% vegan in a lot of ways. I do happen to eat meat, and I eat high fat. And I eat nutrient dense foods, but the vast majority of what I eat is plants, and fresh ones and really high quality ones. And that's what I encourage other people to do as well, because I've seen a lot of people lose weight and then fail doing the other kind, doing the Atkins, which isn't even true Atkins, right? Like if you go back and you read the books, he wasn't all down on salads and saying you shouldn't eat vegetables. It's just people kind of like, the marketers abuse it, people get the wrong idea, and then they start eating too many of the wrong foods. I think it's really important that people recognize that eating real food has a lot more to do with it's a lot more than just counting macros, right? Or saying, I only eat the X amount of protein or whatever. So don't get too dogmatic. So that's answering a part of your question. I don't want to go too far off the rails.
Love it. Yeah. I mean, that's a great approach. And I think that I wanted to pull this out a little bit. You're a musician, okay? And as a musician, you're more creative. And maybe that's through both a little nature and nurture going on, probably more on the nurture side. You can hear a song and get creative. I play the guitar myself. And I think that creativity and flexibility and not wanting to stick to, like you said in your words, being dogmatic about things kind of it transcend into your exercise life and your nutrition life. And I would love to kind of have you expand upon that, because a lot of people get fixated. I'm a CrossFitter, I do paleo, and they don't want to deviate, or I intermittent fast. But what you do is some days you intermittent fast, some days you eat a big breakfast, some days you eat rice, some days you fast. So let's kind of talk about getting out of the rut of identifying, getting rid of our biases, and being a little bit more flexible. Why is that important?
Well, I actually just got off an interview with Kiefer of Carb Backloading and Carb Night, and we were talking about how important it is to be wrong, and how almost everyone, the biggest mistake you can make is being like, I'm vegan, or I'm paleo, or I do CrossFit, because in a way, what you're doing there is you're building up this story, and this is something that's built on an identity that's not really real, and it's not really yours, and it's too dogmatic to be real for you forever. And so, if you're an avid CrossFitter and you're hitting all of your PRs or personal bests and everything you're doing, and then you blow out a knee, then where does that leave you if you can't use your leg for the next 6 months, right? Like, what part of your identity is missing? Same thing when I was talking to another guy today who was a raw vegan for six years, and then he couldn't get out of bed after a while. At first he's like, wow, this is great. And when that happened, all of a sudden, he was complaining to his friends, like, this is wrong, like something's going wrong, because he was like high up in the movement. And they're all just saying, well, you're doing it wrong. Clearly it's not working for you because you're doing it wrong. And so it then he started going and filling up his shopping carts, because he would be recognized at the grocery store. He'd cover yogurt with kale so that no one else could see him, because if he were caught with it, he'd be in big trouble, right? And so, that's just kind of like a ridiculous example of something that we all do a little bit, right? Because if you're paleo, then how are you going to eat that slice of pizza, even if it's made from an heirloom crust and with this buffalo mozzarella or whatever? Part of being human and part of being healthy, I think, is the mental piece and the emotional piece of not being afraid of your food. Orthorexia, or literally, being afraid of your food, is something that's totally real, and in fact being encouraged, I think, by a lot of the devices that are counting every step that you take, and a lot of the tools that are designed to make you more healthy by counting calories or counting macros. But if you get obsessive about it, and that's institutionalized in a gym or in a community, it can lead to some pretty serious problems. So it's important to be measured about all of this. Listen to some of the best advice I ever got was from my dad, who said, listen to your body. And I tried to do that with everything that I do. Body sensing is another. Danny Dreyer is like one of my heroes, who wrote Chi Running, which is about incorporating Tai Chi into your movements, and especially like ultra marathons, and sensing what's going on within the joints, within the muscles. And you can do that with hunger. You can do that with almost any experience at any moment. But most of us have become out of touch with what it means to be hungry, or what it means to be full. And, just the simplest things that all animals kind of innately understand, if they're eating the natural diet anyway.
Right. Great point. Yeah. I have that as a bullet point I wanted to talk about. And since you brought it up, let's get into it. So you have a nice box in your book. It's, I think, in second chapter, about hunger and what's true hunger. And you talk about, we get these emotional triggers that is false hunger. So kind of expand upon where you were going with that hunger, and what are some tips you recommend for people if they kind of feel hungry? How can they test to see if it's true biological hunger?
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because, like you said, we've been traveling all over the place. For the past year, we've been traveling around the world, and especially around the country. And I can tell you, we just drove into Nashville from Florida. And when I see, I joked to Allison, my wife, in the car, it's like, when I see a hamburger and then fries and like all this stuff on the billboards back and forth, it's like, I really want a hamburger right now, But if you're just hanging out in the woods, which is what we like to do most of the time, or being kind of like a natural environment, you don't really think about hamburgers. Mm. You don't think about junk foods, and you don't get that hunger cue. So in a lot of ways, what we're up against is environmental in an unprecedented way. When you're hearing media messaging through your iBuds on the commercials or whatever, or earbuds rather, or you're seeing it on billboards, or you're seeing it on the TV that's on over there that you think you don't see, and you think it's not really messing with you. But when you see that, Twinkie or ice cream cone out of your periphery, you're actually releasing, like your pancreas is squeezing out just a little bit of insulin to get you ready to eat it, because that's, we're all animals, and we have these responses to stimuli that will make us hungry when we don't need food. We don't physiologically need food. So kind of unhooking the mental processes from your actual hunger is really important. One of the ways that you can do that, like a simple thing, is most of Americans, certainly, and us in the Western world, are chronically dehydrated. So a lot of us are actually thirsty when we think that we're hungry. So drinking a big glass of water as soon as you wake up, and whenever you think you might be hungry, taking a bit of water and then seeing how you feel a few minutes after is definitely a really simple thing that you can do. And also, when you avoid carbs, especially of the high glycemic variety, things like cereals, sugars, breads, waffles, pancakes, stuff like that, when you avoid that for a while, your body becomes fat adapted, and you can kind of just run on your fat stores. Like today, all I've had is a little bit of eggs with some veggies, some bone broth, and a little bit of coffee with fat in it. And it's almost 4:00 here. So and that's pretty typical, right? And I don't get hungry until dinner time usually when I do it that way. Unless, I go for a big hike, or I do like a huge strength workout the day before. And then I wake up in the morning and it's a Saturday and I'm with all my folks, and it's like, all right, let's have some pancakes.
Yeah, exactly.
But we'll make them with real food, and we'll make them high fat based on, coconut or vegetables, even in some cases, and using fruit as opposed to using, super processed grains. We'll use usually grain-free type stuff.
Well said. So let's talk about what do you crave in the woods, and maybe why it's important for people. It's not just the diet. Now I want to kind of weave in, your whole approach at, living kind of a wild life, and I think that's important for people to reconnect with nature, get away from EMFs, get some good, oxygen and so forth. So what do you crave? What do you bring when you're going out there and hiking, and you guys spend a lot of time in the woods? Like, share with us. What do you pack?
I usually have it right next to me, but I don't.
Okay.
It's in the other room because I was writing in it, but it's my journal. It's something that's basically full of blank pages that I fill up with whatever, I do write books, obviously, but a lot of the times it's not that directed. It's more just like a brain dump, or it's a thinking through, or it's a doodling, whatever. I read a really cool book when I was like 14, which basically had the secret of all the geniuses who have ever existed. The one thing they had in common. And it turns out it was basically having a journal, and not like necessarily writing it in pretty writing, like a little girl's journal, which is what a lot of people kind of talk about. No, make it whatever you want. Make it basically a blank canvas that you can turn into something, to turn on the creative side. Like you mentioned, it's so important not to think of yourself as a agent of consumption, but someone who creates things. Mm-hmm. And so I always have something that is more like consumptive, where it's a book that I might read, but that will inform the music that I make. That's another thing that I bring. Or the journal that I bring, and I fill that up. My notebook, I fill it up with all sorts of stuff. So books, old-fashioned stuff, right? Like a guitar, a campfire, a book, and a notebook, and my dog and my wife. And it doesn't really you don't really need that much more than that. It's been cool because for the past year, we've been living in an RV, in a trailer that's like as small as a tiny house, maybe even smaller. And you have a different relationship with things when that happens, because you don't want more stuff. People will try to give you things that are like, hey, this is a really cool cup, you should have this. It's like, no, I literally cannot fit that in my cupboard. I do not want that cup. Right. And you'll go and you'll be tempted if all these trinkets that you could buy, especially when you're traveling, from art to little clay figures to other trinkets and toys and whatever. And when you can't fit them, you're like, oh, I don't want stuff that wouldn't make me happy. I don't need it. I can't believe I ever thought that I did. And that's a really, we've lost sight of that. We've been encouraged for so long to consume. It keeps the economy humming. Right? It's like, what does that even mean? Why do I need a new car every 2 years?
Yeah.
So it's nice to kind of break free of that. I think it does make us more human.
Great. It's better for the environment and society and so forth. But back to the journal thing, I've read that too. And what's unique about that, just journaling your thoughts and so forth is, I think it was Napoleon Hill in his book, Think and Grow Rich, and a couple of these other books talked about, like you said, a lot of very successful people. But oftentimes those people don't go back and read what they wrote. They're just kind of dumping and stimulating the creative process, but don't think that if you start journaling that you have to go back and like read everything. It's still productive. To just
I almost never read what I write. And it's cool because when you do that, it's almost like writing it down, tattoos it in your brain, into your mental processes. You don't need to go back and write it because it's like you've completed your thought, if that makes sense.
Love it. Great stuff. All right. So let's keep this outdoor theme going. I wanted to do that this summer, actually. We sold our property in Colorado and are going to buy here in Seattle. And my wife was not down for that. We have a 3-year-old kid and we were like, you know what? I just don't know how it would work out. I mean, with 3 of us and their little kid, 2 dogs. So it'd be a lot of fun, but I couldn't convince her. So anyway, we're going to do some camping instead. But
there you go.
Let's kind of break down some barriers because you've been traveling like this for quite some time, over a year. You stay lean, you got a 6-pack. So let's break down some barriers in this notion that you have to have a gym membership to stay lean. Let's talk about your functional training out in the woods.
So it was last June that we left and we went to, Fiji, Australia, and then Bali. So literally the other side of the world. And then a few weeks after that, I went hiking, bouldering with a friend, broke my foot. And for fat burning man to break his foot is kind of hilarious, especially in retrospect, but not at the time, right? Because like all of my exercises that I pretty much do involve the foot in one way or another, from, doing big compound movements, which would be, squats, deadlifts, even pull-ups. You need to either jump up or land, certainly sprints, biking, almost everything. And I'm like, what do I do now? Because I don't usually go to the gym. I don't really like them. They smell funny. And I like being out in the woods and just, my dad was a stonemason. And so I worked with him for years, and just like, he laughed the first time I said, I want to lift weights. I want to get athletic or whatever. And he's just like, hop in the truck. Went and moved rocks around for the next 15 years or whatever. So, developing that functional strength is really important. But anyway, back to breaking my foot. It's like all of a sudden, no gyms, no normal exercise routine. I needed to completely recreate what it means to be fit. And so I decided, no excuses. I'm going to start just trying to turn into an acrobat or something, and go inverted. And so I'd always wanted to learn how to do handstand push-ups. You see those street performers doing all this crazy stuff that's really, it engages like the critter part of your brain. You imagine like a squirrel darting around a telephone line or something like that. And these guys who are out there, and these gals too, like they look like that. They can do superhuman things. And so I started doing fingertip push-ups and handstand push-ups and yoga holds. And then after my foot healed a little bit, I started doing qigong every day for usually around 20 minutes and working that into my meditation practice, and really built it into a totally different type of exercise plan that was more about doing a little bit every day, getting my blood flowing, almost, when you get that really good circulation that feels like a whole body pump, kind of like you, doing just enough to get there and not necessarily more, and not pushing myself too hard because, you don't want to do that with a broken foot, or else it'll stay broken for a really long time. Totally. But yeah, that was a very cool experience. My first broken bone. I've been injured before, especially doing like martial arts and stuff, but you just get used to it. But that was a really cool, almost like it was destined to happen. I probably think that way because it's the Taoist's fault that I broke my foot, or at least I blame it on him.
Right. That's funny. There's a book out there called The Obstacle is the Way. And it's all about how these little roadblocks in our life actually can be viewed from a more positive angle, and we can grow from them. So I'm sure breaking your foot, I hurt my bicep actually. I jumped into I normally don't do CrossFit, but when I travel, sometimes it's the best way to jump into a workout and get a nice workout when you're sitting all day on the plane. So was in San Diego for a marketing conference, went to a CrossFit, and it was just a bunch of cleans. And I normally don't do cleans. And anyway, hurt my bicep tendon. And so I started doing a lot of handstand push-ups actually myself. So when you were talking about that, I can resonate. And if you haven't done it, folks, if you're watching this, you have to start. And I got my wife into it, and my daughter tries to do it. She can't, obviously, but it's the best because like when you're out in the woods, you can go up against a tree, do some push-ups, and you get your blood to drain down. It's awesome.
That's right. Being like a kid, that's what it is. You go out in the woods and all of a sudden, like the whole thing's a jungle gym, like literally sometimes. And so when I was in Peru a few weeks ago, you're at like 12,000 feet up in the Andes. And so that's ripe for getting a good workout no matter what you're doing. And so I just, went for a little hike and grabbed some smallish boulders and did some swings with them, did some presses with them, some squats. And it's awesome. I mean, you don't need more than that. You can find a rock anywhere.
Yeah, I love it. Or your kid or your dog. No.
Or your kid, your dog.
Your wife. No, it's funny. Let's go back to Indonesia. And in your book, you talk about rice. And a lot of people are kind of spooked about rice and think that it's not paleo, it's a grain and all that. But I'm with you. I love the forbidden black rice. There's a red rice. And talk about kind of the backstory with Indonesia. Give us an overview on it.
It's so cool because that is, in a way, like a tiny little island like Bali in Indonesia is something that is in the past and also in the future. So it's like this ancient society, this ancient culture compared to ours anyway, that has already come up against problems like overpopulation and pollution. And, it's small enough where bringing in machines for, if you're talking about rice, is something that a lot of people didn't like because it took away the jobs. And so a lot of them they'll harvest the rice by hand. They'll do everything by hand because it's, benefiting the overall culture. And not only that, it's kind of a sacred thing to them. It's not just like a widget that can be spat out by any machine and processed into something. And, it might not be fair to talk about it in such general terms, but kind of, I think to tie it up in a bow for the Western mind, it's beneficial to talk about it this way. But they see rice more as, in a lot of Eastern cultures, as a sacred thing. They use it in ceremonies. They don't think of it as just rice or one kind of one rice, the way that we might hear, like, is it white or is it brown?
Right.
If you can even find the brown. I mean, like you said, red rice is something I'd never seen before, and they served it to us as like a delicacy, as a special treat, and it was all fluffed up like oatmeal kind of. It's got this lovely nutty taste to it, and we had it with fresh seafood. Forbidden rice or black rice is something that I've had. Wild rice you can find too. I've had in the past. Mom used to cook it up, and it's great. It's so much more filling. It's got a lot more fiber, a lot more nutrients than the stuff that we're used to eating in America, which is basically just like processed food, a processed staple grain that has all of the life and all the nutrients kind of like sucked out of it through industrial processes. So going back to your roots is going back to those heirloom seeds, the heirloom and heritage varieties of plants and animals that had been around for a long time before they were manipulated into this kind of crazy industrial frankenfood. And, if you look at the chickens there too, totally different thing. The chickens there are running around all day and laying eggs, and, the people who are cooking your meals are chasing them around and picking up the eggs. And if you want a chicken, then a lot of times you'll be involved with literally slaughtering it and processing it yourself, getting it ready for a meal. And when you know a chicken, it's a lot different when you eat it. It's a lot more sacred than if you think that it just comes from the grocery store. And that chicken, by the way, in a lot of cases, it never used its legs and was fed basically toxins and poisons and low quality food to make it as fat as possible, and was bred to have breasts so big that its feet would break if it walked. I mean, it's straight out of a draconian horror novel, the food that we're eating today. So it's really refreshing to go outside of that and see that there is another way, and that's what we can go back to.
No, it's such an important point and something that a lot of diet books don't get into. And I want to expand on that. I'm sure you've bought, protein, animal protein, lamb or beef or grass-fed beef from a local farm. And I shared this before on the show, but I'll just say it again. We did that last summer. I mean, normally we'll buy grass-fed beef from our co-op, and we're like, you know what? Why don't we just get it right from the farmer? So we sent an email, sent in our deposit, and then I got a note back, and it was Martin at Barron Farms, and he says, we just put the cow down. And I was like, oh my gosh, you don't really put two and two together. You just buy meat from the store. It's like buying an apple, And so, and then he said, we processed the cow. It weighed 150 pounds. So anyway, it really makes me appreciate and be more grateful every time we cook that meat and so forth. And I think, we're so disconnected, not only from nature, like we just talked about, going out in the woods and journaling and reconnecting, but our food. And if people were just to experience, maybe not killing the chicken, but being around chickens and seeing what chickens do and how they act, and seeing beef, it would change our consumption.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can tell you, you're a lot less likely to eat an enormous amount of it when you named that food that you're eating, right? Like my parents, when I went back a few months ago, they had 2 cows, beef critters that they were hosting in New Hampshire in our fields for a friend who, raised those to basically have grass-fed meat that he could sell to his friends and stuff like that. And it's hard. You get emotional about it because, like, God, they put down Bessie, like that's in my hamburger, And so you're not going to eat an enormous amount of it kind of mindlessly. You're like, you want to pray before you eat. And I think that's the way it should be, right? That's the way it always used to be. We were grateful for our food. We didn't eat too much of it. That's another point where it's like, to use Bali as another example, I asked them, a lot of the locals there, why they thought Americans were fat. And it was so interesting because, the conversations just were so funny. Like, if you get a chicken, this is me summarizing something that's also in the book. One guy who was a cook, he was talking about, if you're in Bali and you have a quarter chicken, will feed you and your whole family. The family, you'll just have, some veggies, a little bit of meat with your meal, and then some rice. And that will be it. And you'll be very satisfied, very thankful that you had that. If you're in America, or if you're American, you eat a whole chicken, or you get chicken by the bucket, right? And you just kind of like slam it down your throat while you're watching football or something. Like that's
right.
That's, or in the front seat of a car, or if you're lucky enough, maybe at a picnic, but you're not really like connected to what that food. I mean, it barely resembles chicken, to be fair, but it's so far removed from where we started and where we can go back to if we really want to reclaim our health and reclaim the meaning of food. I think a lot of people who are healthy aren't just like counting their macros. They find meaning in what they're eating. And not just like identity based, I'm vegan, I'm paleo, whatever. It's more just like, this is right for my body. This is what my body wants. It gets all hippy dippy going back to, my mom in New Hampshire. This is how I was raised. And I think it's something that is so beautiful and so many people are missing out on, especially in the generations that are coming up now. So it's my responsibility to share that, because I'm just so thankful that I got to see that, because it didn't used to be rare, but it is now.
Yeah, that's a great point. Now, can we scale farming, or can we scale your childhood experience to a lot of Americans? I mean, 70%, as you know, Abel, of American adults are overweight or obese, and we now know a lot of children are overweight or obese. So how do we make this scalable? I mean, obviously conversations like you and I are having, your book, which does an amazing job, but what do you think, visiting farms, going and seeing these beautiful cows, which, by the way, this weekend took my daughter to this Remlinger farm here in Seattle, out in the woods, and cows are beautiful. I couldn't imagine putting one to sleep. They twitter their ears, and they kind of flaunt with each other, and they play around. They're awesome. But so back to the question, how is this scalable, and what tips would you offer for families that want to, have children that have the mindset like yourself?
Get kids involved in the process. One of the reasons that I'm sure I wound up writing the book and having my show is because, I would go fishing with my dad, and we'd get the fish, we'd get the pickerel, which is all bony and like doesn't even taste that good necessarily, but we'd take its guts out and clean the fish and learn how to do that. And then we'd fry it up, this tiny little piece of meat, we'd fry it up in the skillet and some butter, and we'd all eat it together as a family. And I was just talking to someone else who said, with their kids, if you just hand them like a green juice or something like that has vegetables in it that you might have made, or a green smoothie or something that you made for yourself because it's good for you, they're like, I don't know, this doesn't taste that great or whatever. I'm a kid, I want something sugary. But when you involve them in the process, there's like a magical thing that happens. Like if you show them all the vegetables that it comes from, and you have them like throw it in the blender, he said, I'm summarizing, but basically his kid gets excited about drinking it every time because he was involved in the process of making it. It's a meaningful behavior for him, as opposed to just, eating a fruit roll up or something, which isn't.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. What we've done around here, we don't have a farm, but we have bird feeders all throughout the backyard, and, for the sounds and the kind of peacefulness that they bring. But I involve my daughter with that. I mean, they just mow through this black sunflower seeds. I mean, it's crazy. I just filled up this big thing, and I looked out this morning and it was almost gone. So involving your kids on a smaller level, and although we don't necessarily eat those birds, never have, never will, but it's a great way for them to kind of, notice that, okay, we're friends with animals. We like animals. We don't need to overconsume them. And then having pets is a great thing for kids too, not only for the bacteria and the whole hygiene hypothesis and autoimmunity, but just, connecting with animals in nature, I think is a great point. Now, let's kind of go back to farming. You grew up on the farm, and then I think we were talking about this earlier. At the turn of the 19th century, there was 1 in 10 adults were farmers. Now it's 4 in 100. So are you going to have a farm when you're older? And if so, on what level you think is practical for people?
Yeah. I mean, my dream is to, which isn't possible yet, but is to have a homestead, essentially, like a small farm where we can provide for ourselves, our family, that we'll hopefully have someday, and maybe extended family, people who can come visit or whatever, and grow our own food. That's something that is just awesome and needs to happen. And especially for kids, like you were saying, being raised in an environment like that, even like the farm that I was raised on wasn't a functioning farm anymore by the time I was raised there. We had our own chickens. We had, some animals, and certainly a lot of fruit and like wild edibles and stuff like that. But just being involved in nature and getting some dirt under your fingernails and picking the parsnips with mom and dad and doing that stuff is so important, so much more important than all of us realize, that it's essential that we don't lose sight of it. And we're about to, right? As a society, as a civilization. So it takes people like you to do your show, and lots of books to come out, and lots of kind of like scratching of the head to figure out, how do we scale this? Because it's not like, how do we scale it? We have to, right? There's not really any alternative. Otherwise, we're going to be growing, dead food for everyone. And it's going, all of those horror novels and movies and sci-fi stuff from the future that have this dystopian thing where you're just, riding around on a little scooter, sucking on a big gulp or whatever, and you're overweight, like in Wall-E. Like, that's what it will become if we don't protect real food, and we don't protect the meaning behind food. So yeah, that's my dream, to have a farm someday.
Love it. Yeah, me as well. I'm a big fan of that. And speaking of which, it's kind of off the topic, but I went paddleboarding on Sunday in Lake Washington, which is around a lot of beautiful homes, and a lot of people like to spray glyphosate and so forth and Roundup on their lawns to keep them nice and pretty. And so I was paddleboarding, and there was dead fish everywhere. I've grew up here. I mean, I'm 32 years in the Northwest, and I've never seen it like that. It's really scary. I'm not blaming it on glyphosate, but it was around parts where there's a lot of very pretty lawns. And I have a buddy who lives on the water, and both of his neighbors just have the truck come and they spray the Roundup, and it goes right into the water. So yeah, it's a real deal. And it's important to educate people, because we think that, for those of us listening that are practitioners or so forth, or we're in this industry, we think like everyone knows that glyphosate and GMOs are bad for you, but a lot of people don't. It's pretty remarkable.
Well, it's poison, right? It's designed to kill things, and we use a lot of it, like an exorbitant amount of it, tons and tons. And it's just not sustainable in any way. Like, if you think about it, A lot of the people say it feeds the world. No, it doesn't. It kills the world.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have been suffering. I mean, the same company, it's ridiculous. I call it out in the book, but like the same companies that manufacture Agent Orange and, the chemicals that are designed to kill things are now running our food system. And so it's no wonder that we're all fatter and sicker than ever. We need to break free of that. It's really important that we do. And it's important that we do it as soon as possible, because, spraying the entire world with poison over and over again can't be good for our kids' generation. It's like, maybe we can get by. Maybe the baby boomers can get by ignoring it for a while, because it won't really affect them too much. And maybe our generation can get by for a while, and it'll start to affect us. But for our kids, like the world that we're killing is the one that they're going to end up with. So that's why I'm excited about all this. That's why I get fired up. Not necessarily because everything is so bad right now, but because I see that if things don't change, it could be for the people who are coming up next. And it's our responsibility to be stewards, of this land, as opposed to people who are just consuming it and poisoning it and whatever.
Right. Yeah, that's beautifully said there. And I wanted to kind of finish up, Abel, on fasting. And I admit that I'm kind of stuck in my biases and personally don't like to fast because I like working out and having energy and stuff like that. But you have some really compelling reasons in your book about why you should fast. And you talk about, that moment when you took fasting seriously. So maybe if you could summarize some lessons learned from fasting and maybe even ketosis, and maybe offer some tips for people that haven't really gone down that road yet.
Yeah. Well, there are so many benefits of eating less, and fasting is a way to do that without being hungry in a lot of cases. So that's why I like it. I found very simply from a compliance standpoint that I got hungry as soon as I started eating in the morning, no matter when it was, so if I started eating at 8, even if it were totally, like high fat, moderate protein, or even a green smoothie, I do experience hunger in a way that is kind of unavoidable for the rest of the day, pretty much usually. And that's me now. That could change, right? But when I found fasting, I was just like, oh, if I could push this out a little bit, maybe wait until 10 or 12 or 3 or even later than that, let's see how I feel. And at first I thought, all my muscles would fall off and I would, wither away and turn into some golem-like creature. But the opposite happened. I actually, at around the same time, was doing deadlifts and heavy squats and kind of like turning down the amount of endurance running I was doing. And I put on like 10, 15 pounds of lean mass when I started doing fasting. So for me, I really like the balance of it, because eating is in some ways a chore. If you're doing it a lot, like taking away one meal prep, one meal eating time, and one meal cleanup time, saves an hour, 2 hours in some cases. So if I'm eating, basically I'll eat 1.5 meals a day, sometimes 2 meals a day or whatever. Yeah. But that's a huge time savings, and it's a huge energy savings. Like in the morning, I like it because at this point in my life, I'm not really running marathons. I obviously want to stay in good shape, but I'm focusing on doing really good work. And a lot of that isn't physical. So if you're not doing physical work and you're not working out hard, especially every day, then you don't really need as much food as we're used to eating. And so that's fasting, from a biochemical and scientific perspective, turns on autophagy, like ups your mitochondrial function, does a lot of really cool biochemical things. But mostly it's just a really awesome lifestyle choice. And it's, for my mom, even it gets a little bit trickier with women, but my mom was struggling with like her last 10 pounds for the past few years, even though her diet's great. She exercises, she's a Zumba instructor. Wow. But she couldn't get rid of those last 10 pounds until she started doing the morning thing, pushing it out, eating after Zumba instead of before, or even after that, and just having, fat in her coffee or a little bit of fat in the morning instead of like a full meal. That allowed her to get to 125 pounds, which is basically her high school weight. And she's almost 60 years old now. And so sometimes doing that little extra thing can help you break out of whatever pattern you were in. And it helps reconnect you with like true hunger versus artificial hunger.
Right. I love it. That's fantastic. So on most days, then you basically do a modified intermittent fast and you don't eat till the afternoon. Is that what I'm hearing?
Generally, yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe not every day, because some days, like especially on the weekends, we'll enjoy it. And it's important to eating is a ritual. So it's important to honor that sometimes. But yeah, if I'm left to my own devices, I'll generally eat around like noon, 3, or even like 5, 6 p.m.
Awesome tips. And what's nice about that is everyone is so different. And here you are,
Yeah.
you're physically fit, you're walking the walk and talking the talk. So it's nice for people that are listening, if they're kind of afraid of something because they might lose muscle, or they heard it was bad, they heard it was catabolic. You don't really know how it's going to affect your body until you try.
Right. Yeah, you don't. So that's why it's important to be your own guinea pig sometimes. Don't take our word for it.
Love it, Abel. So before we go to final questions, is there anything that you wanted to talk about in the context of your book, or something you learned from interviewing all the experts on Fat Burning Man podcast that we didn't get to cover?
Health experts disagree about almost everything, except for the fact that we should all be eating more green and colorful, especially non-starchy vegetables. Having a green smoothie, having a big salad is something that we do almost every day. It's probably the most boring advice you could ever get, but I give it because it's so easy. It's so simple. A lot of the things that you hear as health advice are designed to be as complicated as possible so that you are, remain in this confusion. But it doesn't have to be that way. It can be very, very simple. So the coolest thing about eating a fair amount of veggies and fruits and like real foods every day is that it pushes out whatever else would be making you hungry. So like when I see Oreos, or maybe if I see a billboard of a hamburger, I want a hamburger, but not that one. Right? Like it pushes out the bad kind. It resets your palate, your senses, your sense of smell. When you stay away from the junk and you focus on eating real stuff, it just resets your whole body in a beautiful way.
Yeah. Beautifully said. And there's some good science there. I mean, we now know about the bitter receptors, and various taste hormones are found even in our heart and all throughout the body. So it's when you get these nice greens, they stimulate appetite sensing pathways. So great stuff there, Abel. So one of the questions that we ask every guest on the show is, if there was one herb, nutrient, or botanical, maybe you're going to Bali and you're not coming back, what would you bring with you and why?
I usually bring rhodiola. That's one of my favorite. It's an adaptogenic herb that kind of, it's difficult to describe, but the feeling that I get when I take it is that it's kind of filling in the gaps of whatever I needed. Seems like it's taking care of it. It gives you like a little energy boost. If you're stressed out, if you're a little too like high strung, buzzed out, it brings you down. If you're a little sluggish, it tends to like bring me up a little bit. There are a lot of herbs that you can take for health that, when I take them, at least, I don't feel a thing. Like my brain doesn't feel any different. My body doesn't feel any different, whatever. But when I take good quality rhodiola, I do feel that. And I usually combine it with like greens, chlorella, spirulina, and different rounds of adaptogens or whatever. But if I had one, I'd probably choose that one.
Yeah, that's a good one. Take that twice a day with a combination product with ashwagandha and some different, there's a rapunticum. I botched that word, but it's a kind of like rhodiola, but it's a really hardy herb that's found, or that grows, is endemic to northern parts of Europe. And so hunters would actually chew on this rapunticum, and it's very similar in the properties. But I noticed when I used to do bike racing competitively, rhodiola and rapunticum together were just awesome for stamina and endurance and stuff like that. So fantastic. And you run a very busy business. You wrote a book. We want to know, Abel, what's your morning routine? We know that very productive people have routines, evening and morning and throughout the day. So what does your first couple hours of your morning look like?
I wake up in the morning, usually early, drink a big glass of water. And then I almost always immediately do Qigong. And that's basically like Tai Chi or yoga. It's like a light stretching movement that kind of massages the organs from the inside out. It's great for balance. So I do that for about 20 minutes. Then I meditate for probably another 20-ish. Wow. And then usually I read the I Ching and I start at that point to start planning out my day. Sometimes I do it the night before, but usually I have this little, in addition to my notebook, I have a tiny little notebook that's just like to-do list. And I write down just one page, and usually it's about half the page of things that are really important to do that day. One of my favorite books is by Brian Tracy called Eat That Frog, which is about doing the biggest, ugliest, gnarliest task that you have first thing in the morning and just crushing it so that it's done, using that as momentum to get you through the rest of the day. So I usually do that in the morning after my little morning routine, with usually home roasted coffee with some delicious grass-fed heavy cream in it. And then I get to work. Then I do something like this, where I'm doing a day of, I think this is like my 8th interview today. And other days I'll be writing or I'll be playing music. Morning's a great time to play some music. So I like to squeeze that in there. But a lot of people don't get that sacred morning time for themselves. So usually the easiest way to do it is to wake up a little bit earlier, and not to sacrifice sleep. Like eventually you want to start going to bed earlier, but waking up ahead of other people is incredible, because you can get the things done that you've always wanted to do, whether it's learning a language, reading a book, doing the qigong that I mentioned, or some other sorts of exercises. Usually also, I guess I missed that part, I'll do a quick, like 2 to 5 minute exercise. Like I was saying, the handstand push-ups, maybe a Tabata session of burpees or something like that. And that kind of gets my blood pumping in the morning and gets my brain working.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's why some people stay up at night, referring back to your comment that, that sacred time that we're all looking for to read that book that we've always wanted to read or study a certain topic. And I think, at least I used to fall into this camp where I would end up staying up later and then my day would be unproductive. And I think it's easier if you flip it around a little bit, like you said, and go to bed with the sun, wake up with the sun, which would be, around 5 a.m., particularly this time of year. You feel a lot better. So when you were out in the woods, just to kind of divert a little bit, what was your sleeping duration like? Because you probably don't have like complete blackout shades in your camper. Maybe you do, but were you getting 6 hours, 8 hours? Tell us about that.
Yeah. It's so cool. When you go camping, I've always kind of found this. It's like the sun goes down and then it's been a little while, you're around the fire or something like that, and you're not around technology. So you're like, oh, I'm really tired. What time? Must be like, 11 o'clock. You look down at your watch, or you like figure out your phone, whatever, you figure out what time it is. It's 8:30. It's just your body likes to go to sleep when it gets dark. That's the way that it should work anyway. So we would fall asleep around like 9:30 a lot of the time and wake up at like 5. So I would sleep 8 to 9 hours, sometimes more, sometimes a little bit less. But my body seems to like 8.5 hours. And, you can get by. And a lot of people argue that they can get by, and sure you can, but you also get sick a lot more often. You're not really like on top of it like you could be. You don't have the energy that you otherwise could have if you gave yourself all of that sleep, woke up without an alarm. So when I wake up without an alarm, it's usually 8.5, sometimes even 9 hours.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I think if you're active during the day and do some activity and you're out hiking and walking around, it's very easy to sleep for that long. So
it's the best.
Yeah.
I don't like don't sleep. Sleeping is amazing.
Right. Yeah, I love that. I've been getting into valerian and whole chamomile herb tea. We have two different French presses at night. So one's for like the calming teas and one's for our coffee. And
nice.
Sleeping, I can remember all my dreams and I feel refreshed. So
cool. Yeah.
That's a cool one. All right, Abel, a couple of last questions here. So if you were to rub shoulders with Barack Obama or a future president and they turned to you and said, Abel is an author and podcaster and health expert, what sort of information would you want me to share with Americans? So, some sort of lifestyle or health tip. What would you tell him and why?
Well, I've heard, I actually don't even know that this is true, but I think it is, that the White House is served organic food. And I'd ask them why the White House is, but not schools, and why not government buildings, and why not Fortune 500s, and why isn't that the standard? Because it used to be, right? Why is everything covered in Roundup and pesticides or whatever? I don't know. I'd probably be a little bit more cordial than that, but I think those are the issues that are glaring, and the reason that they haven't really been resolved is because the government is run by corporations. I can say that after working with both the government and corporations, that it's, it's not a secret. It's kind of been a revolving door for a long time. So in policy, you have a lot of conflict of interest, and somehow we need to get beyond that and make sure that, we're not feeding our kids poison.
Right. Wow. Great info. There's a good documentary out right now called Bot. Have you heard of it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's about that trifecta or that triad between agriculture, big pharma, and the government. And so
Right.
we know that like as you said earlier, big pharma is owned by big agro and vice versa, and then policies made around that. So it's tough relationship there. But Abel, you have this great book called The Wild Diet. I want everyone to know about that, and I'm sure you have some bonuses. And tell our listeners where they can learn a little bit more about that and your work.
Yeah, totally. So easiest place to find me is by going to fatburningman.com. And when you sign up for the email list, you get a free quick start guide and a bunch of like cool videos and freebies. Also, if you like Google Hangouts, podcasts, shows like that, obviously I have a podcast of the same name, Fat Burning Man, which you can look up on iTunes. But easiest way to stay in touch is to go to fatburningman.com.
Well, keep up the good work, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.